The studio was silent for just a moment before chaos erupted. A decorated veteran, standing tall and unwavering, looked directly into the camera and uttered the words no one expected. "Donald Trump is a traitor." Gasps rippled through the audience. The host's eyes widened in shock, and the tension in the room became palpable. This wasn't just another political debate. This was war. The accusation wasn't subtle. It was a direct, unfiltered challenge. Was this bravery, betrayal, or something much bigger? But before anyone could fully process the weight of those words, Trump himself fired back. His response wasn't just a defense. It was an all-out counterattack, one that left the entire room stunned. The veteran stood his ground, but what followed changed everything. This wasn't just a heated exchange. It was the moment that shook America to its core. Before we get into today's story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Now let's get started. The interview was never meant to be fair. From the moment Donald Trump agreed to sit down for the televised debate, the stage had already been set against him. The network, notorious for its openly biased coverage, had lined up a panel of so-called neutral commentators, each with a history of hostility toward him. The audience, handpicked by producers, was stacked with vocal critics who had been instructed to react at just the right moments. The host, a veteran journalist with a smug grin and a reputation for setting up political traps, had one goal: catch Trump off guard and make him stumble on live television. But that wasn't enough. Behind the scenes, the producers had orchestrated a shocking twist, one designed to deliver the ultimate blow. They had secretly arranged for a highly decorated military veteran to be a surprise guest, someone with an impeccable record, a hero in the eyes of the nation. His job? To deliver a brutal, unexpected accusation that would leave Trump no room to recover. The moment was timed perfectly. The host would feign surprise, the audience would react in horror, and the veteran's words would be repeated in headlines across the country before Trump even had a chance to respond. As the countdown to the segment began, the tension in the room thickened. The cameras were rolling, the nation was watching, and Trump, seated under the glare of the studio lights, had no idea what was about to hit him. The moment the veteran opened his mouth, everything changed. His words hit like a ton of bricks. Donald Trump is a traitor. His actions have undermined everything we stand for. The room went dead silent for a brief second, only to erupt into gasps and murmurs. The veteran, a man with decades of service, was shaking his head as he pointed a finger at Trump. He sold out this country for personal gain, turning his back on the people who gave him everything. The TV host's grin was wide, as though he'd just won a lottery ticket. He jumped in, eager to amplify the drama. "You're hearing it from someone who fought for this country, folks," he said, smugly addressing the camera. "The man has blood on his hands." Trump, still seated, blinked in disbelief. He looked at the audience, some nodding along with the veteran's words, others whispering behind their hands. The tension was palpable. The perfect storm had been unleashed. Trump opened his mouth to respond, but the host, sensing the opportunity to humiliate him further, interrupted. "Let him speak," the host said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Mr. Trump, explain yourself." Trump tried to regain control of the conversation, his voice steady but strained. "I've given everything for this country. I've supported our military and our veterans." The host's voice cut through again, sharp and mocking. "Oh, but do your actions Back that up, Mr. Trump. Can you explain that to the thousands of Americans you've turned your back on? His tone was designed to degrade Trump, to make him look weak, defenseless. The veteran chimed in again, leaning forward in his chair, sneering as he spoke. This country deserves better than a man like you. We've seen the lies, the betrayals, and you call yourself a patriot? His eyes locked onto Trump's, daring him to speak. But the audience wasn't making it any easier. The gasps and murmurs were louder now, as people exchanged shocked glances, unable to process the intensity of the attack. The energy in the studio was electric, and Trump could feel the weight of every eye on him, judging, waiting for his response. But the interruptions didn't stop. The host, now emboldened, mocked Trump openly. Look at him, folks. He's speechless, doesn't know how to answer. Trump's anger began to simmer, but each time he tried to speak, the host and the veteran kept cutting him off. Mr. Trump, answer the question. Why did you abandon us? Why did you throw us under the bus? The veteran's words were sharp as blades, each one cutting deeper into Trump's resolve. The host smiled, his eyes dancing with satisfaction. Seems like you're lost for words, Mr. Trump. Can't defend yourself, can you? It was a calculated attack, an effort to break Trump's confidence and force him into a corner. The veteran's accusations were relentless, his tone unforgiving, as if he had been waiting for this moment his entire life. The audience's reactions followed suit, some mocking Trump's silence, others whispering amongst themselves. Despite the onslaught, Trump didn't lose composure. He kept his cool, but his frustration was clear. With every attempt to respond, he was met with mockery, with interruptions designed to shut him down and make him appear weak. The TV host could barely contain his glee. It was a trap, perfectly executed, designed to make Trump crumble on live television. But the damage was done, and the audience's reactions were telling. The words of the veteran, fueled by years of perceived betrayal, had cut deep. The air in the studio was thick with tension, and Trump had to fight to even get a word in. The more he tried to defend himself, the more the host and the veteran dug in. The audience, who had come to watch an epic showdown, was now witnessing a public humiliation, with the stakes rising by the second. Would Trump sink under the pressure? Would he fold in front of millions of viewers? The moment came like a thunderclap. Trump, who had endured the relentless barrage of insults, lies, and interruptions, finally locked eyes with the host and the veteran. For the first time since the attack began, there was a fire in his gaze, a quiet rage simmering beneath his composed exterior. It was as though the pressure had been building up, and now it was about to explode. He took a deep breath, adjusting himself in his chair, and slowly, with deliberate calm, he leaned forward. You know, it's easy to stand here and throw stones when you haven't done a damn thing to actually change this country. Trump's voice rang out, cutting through the noise of the host's interruptions. The host's smirk faltered, the veteran stiffened, and the audience grew still, sensing something was shifting. Let me tell you something, Trump continued, his voice steady but sharp. I've done more for this country than you ever will in your entire life. I've put America first, made decisions that were not easy, but they were right. You think calling me a traitor makes you a hero? It just shows how out of touch you are. He paused for a moment, letting the weight of his words sink in. I fought for this country. I worked to make it stronger, safer, and more prosperous. And you're sitting there, pretending like you know what's best, while the country is falling apart. The host, who had been so smug just moments ago, suddenly looked uncomfortable. His confidence started to crack. He opened his mouth, but Trump wasn't done yet. "You sit there and criticize me, but where were you when the real fights were being fought? Where were you when real men and women gave their lives for this country? You think you're a patriot? You think you understand what it means to serve this country? Let me tell you, you don't. You never will." The veteran, who had been all but triumphant moments before, now seemed to hesitate. Trump's words were powerful, resonating with an anger and passion that could not be ignored. The audience, who had been laughing and murmuring just minutes before, were now silent, eyes locked on Trump. There was something magnetic about his response, something raw and authentic that drew them in. And that's when the tide turned. The TV host tried to recover, but his words stumbled. "But you... He trailed off, his usual smooth, mocking tone failing him as Trump's words hit too close to home. The veteran was no longer as certain in his stance either. The truth that Trump spoke, with conviction, was undeniable. He had hit a nerve. The public was starting to see through the host's and the veteran's facade. They weren't the ones fighting for this country. Trump was. Then, something incredible happened. People began to speak up. The social media buzz that had been building under the surface erupted. On Twitter, the hashtag #TrumpExposed began trending, but it wasn't what the host or the veteran had hoped for. The comments flooded in. Viewers and public figures began to take to their keyboards, voicing their support for Trump, calling out the host's manipulation and denouncing the unfair treatment of the former president. The veteran, who thought his words would crush Trump, was now being painted as the villain. The host's smugness slowly turned into panic. As Trump delivered his powerful, viral-worthy response, the atmosphere in the studio shifted. The once confident TV host was now on the defensive, trying to regain control, but every word he spoke seemed to dig him deeper into the hole. His attempt to discredit Trump only made things worse. Trump had exposed the cracks in their narrative, and it was too late to undo the damage. The online backlash was swift and unforgiving. Clips of Trump's response were shared across social media platforms, going viral in a matter of minutes. Users from all walks of life, Republicans, independents, even some Democrats, were rallying behind Trump, praising his ability to stand up to the injustice, to fight back when the system tried to tear him down. The tide was shifting, and the host, once so confident in his ability to control the narrative, was losing ground fast. The TV host tried desperately to salvage the situation, but it was clear he was no longer in control. He overreached, trying to launch one final attack on Trump, but it backfired. His words, which were meant to undermine Trump's credibility, only served to make him look desperate. The host had underestimated the power of Trump's comeback. What had started as an ambush, a calculated attack designed to humiliate, had turned into Trump's defining moment. As the host sputtered in his attempt to salvage the interview, it became apparent that the audience and viewers were no longer on his side. The more he spoke, the more he alienated himself from them. The veteran, too, seemed to shrink back as Trump's powerful words continued to resonate. The carefully crafted narrative of Trump being a traitor was crumbling, replaced by the image of a man fighting for what he believed in. The studio's energy had shifted completely, and in that moment, it was clear who the real victor was. Trump's response had gone from a simple defense to a full-fledged takedown, and the internet had taken notice. The tables had turned. Trump was no longer the one on the defensive. The host and the veteran were now the ones on the ropes, and there was no going back. The battle had been won in that moment, and the aftermath would leave the TV host humiliated, and Trump's response immortalized in the minds of millions. The war wasn't over, but the first major victory had been claimed. The aftermath of Trump's explosive comeback was nothing short of seismic. Within minutes of the interview ending, social media platforms erupted. Twitter was flooded with hashtags like #TrumpWins, #Trump destroyed the host, and #Veteran exposed, each one gaining traction as millions of users voiced their opinions. People from every corner of the political spectrum seemed to rally behind Trump, calling out the host for his manipulative tactics and the veteran for his dishonorable comments. The viral clips of Trump's powerful rebuttal spread like wildfire. Within hours, they had been shared thousands of times across Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. His words were no longer just a response. They had become a cultural moment, a viral piece of content that transcended politics and became a symbol of resilience in the face of unwarranted attacks. As the clips continued to circulate, the outrage grew. News outlets, social media influencers, and everyday citizens began dissecting the interview. Critics of the host's behavior were vocal, demanding accountability. On Twitter, users were quick to share their disbelief at how the veteran's comments went unchecked and how the TV host allowed the interview to devolve into a smear campaign. Boycott the show trended, and the backlash against the host grew louder by the minute. Advertisers who had previously aligned themselves with the show quickly took notice, and one by one, sponsorships started pulling their support. What was once a popular network brand quickly began to lose credibility as big names in the corporate world distanced themselves from the show. The situation continued to escalate as public figures and politicians began weighing in. Prominent conservative voices celebrated Trump's comeback and expressed their admiration for his strength and composure in the face of what many perceived as a setup. High-profile Republican politicians tweeted their support, with some even calling for investigations into the host's behavior. This is how the mainstream media treats those who dare to stand up for America, one senator tweeted, adding fuel to the fire. On the other side, the left-wing figures who had once backed the host began to distance themselves as well, recognizing the shift in public sentiment. It wasn't just the political sphere that took notice. Celebrities, influencers, and even everyday Americans began to flood social media with their own reactions to the showdown. Videos of people reacting to Trump's response went viral, with some calling it the best comeback in televised history. Memes started circulating, turning Trump's words into iconic sound bites that people shared with pride. The entire episode became a pop culture moment, one that everyone seemed to have an opinion on, whether they supported Trump or not. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, the situation was growing increasingly dire for the TV host and the veteran. The media landscape was abuzz with questions about the ethics of the interview, and the more the show tried to defend itself, the worse the situation became. Viewers were no longer interested in what the host had to say. They wanted to know how this travesty had been allowed to happen. As more evidence of behind-the-scenes manipulation came to light, viewers began to demand justice. Whistleblowers from the production team started anonymously leaking information about how the interview was intentionally structured to discredit Trump. These revelations only added fuel to the fire, and the network's reputation began to disintegrate. In an attempt to salvage what remained of the show's credibility, the host tried to make a public apology, but it only seemed to make things worse. His apology was seen as insincere and tone-deaf, and the damage continued to mount. Meanwhile, Trump's camp saw an opportunity to capitalize on the situation. He took to social media, issuing a statement that not only reiterated his comeback, but also used the entire debacle as a call to action for his supporters. This is why we need leaders who are unafraid to stand up against the fake news and the lies they push, Trump said in a tweet that was shared millions of times. The backlash against the show was swift and unforgiving, with sponsors pulling their support and advertisers refusing to associate their brands with the scandal. The network was left scrambling. The show's ratings plummeted, and calls for a boycott of the network grew louder. The public began to demand answers, and the network found itself under intense scrutiny. It wasn't just the host who had lost control. The entire media empire seemed to be unraveling. News reports were filled with stories about the decline in viewership and the growing outrage from the public. For Trump, the fallout was the exact opposite. His social media following exploded as supporters flocked to him in droves. His response to the interview had proven to be a defining moment of his career. Public sentiment had shifted. What was once seen as a politically divisive figure was now viewed as a champion for free speech and standing up against media manipulation. As the dust settled, the network's credibility was in tatters, and the host, once hailed as a media powerhouse, was left to face the consequences of his actions. The veteran, who had tried to bring Trump down, saw his reputation damaged as well. The public had turned on them, and the fallout was catastrophic. Meanwhile, Trump's supporters stood victorious, celebrating his powerful comeback and the swift destruction of the media narrative aimed at him. The interview had not just been a war of words, it had become a battle for truth and public perception, with the host and the veteran losing in dramatic fashion. The internet exploded with reactions, and the fallout from this televised showdown would echo through the media landscape for weeks, if not months, to come. In the wake of the explosive showdown, the pressure began to mount on the network, the host, and the veteran. What started as a public spectacle was now becoming a legal nightmare for the show's creators. Trump, ever the strategist, knew that the media had not just wronged him publicly, but had tried to manipulate the truth for a political agenda. His legal team immediately sprang into action, filing a lawsuit against the network for defamation and the deliberate slander that took place during the interview. The suit claimed that the network and its affiliates had intentionally misrepresented his words, twisting them to paint him in a false light. Trump, who had built a reputation on being a fighter, was now preparing to fight back in the most formidable way possible, through the courts. Simultaneously, behind the scenes, the tide was turning against the show. Leaked evidence began to surface that would completely shift the narrative. Whistleblowers from within the production team revealed shocking details about how the interview was orchestrated. According to these insiders, the interview had not been an innocent debate or casual conversation. It had been a calculated attack. The production staff had been directed by higher-ups to put Trump in a compromising position, leading him down a path where he would be unable to defend himself effectively. They had known from the start that the veteran would attempt to paint Trump as a traitor, and the show's producers had engineered the setup, even coaching the veteran on how to deliver his insults. As more documents were leaked, it became clear that this wasn't just an isolated incident. The network's broader agenda, including their history of biased reporting and manipulating interviews for sensationalism, was exposed. Internal memos were published, revealing how the executives pushed for controversy at any cost, even if it meant sacrificing journalistic integrity. The network had become a machine of political bias and ratings-hungry sensationalism, and now the truth was beginning to seep through the cracks. These leaks weren't just a slap in the face to the network. They were a public exposure of corruption at the highest levels. The legal battle intensified as new evidence continued to surface. Trump's legal team filed motions to subpoena internal communications, aiming to reveal the full extent of the manipulation and setup. The public got their first glimpse into the inner workings of the show's editorial process, and it was far from pretty. It turned out that the veteran, far from being an independent voice, had been briefed and coached on how to antagonize Trump, with specific instructions to provoke him into an emotional response. These behind-the-scenes tactics were exposed in a flurry of media coverage, with journalists and pundits alike calling for accountability. As the story snowballed, the network's executives began to panic. They tried to distance themselves from the scandal, but the evidence was irrefutable. The show's ratings, already in freefall after the viral moment, plummeted even further. Sponsors pulled their ads, citing the network's damaged reputation and the ethical violations exposed during the legal proceedings. Advertisers and business partners who had once been eager to align with such a high-profile show now found themselves facing public backlash for associating with a brand that had manipulated the truth so blatantly. The legal action wasn't just about money for Trump, it was about sending a message. The lawsuit demanded significant damages for defamation and emotional distress. But more importantly, it called for public accountability for the network's role in orchestrating the media attack. Trump's camp made it clear that they weren't just fighting for compensation, they were fighting to ensure that this kind of manipulation didn't happen again. The case brought attention to the broader issue of media corruption and the ways in which powerful figures in the media industry could skew the narrative for political or personal gain. The whistleblower revelations added another layer of complexity to the case. One key insider, a former senior producer at the network, came forward with detailed testimony about the production team's involvement in scripting the attack. This whistleblower, who had previously been too afraid to speak out, now felt compelled to reveal the truth. Their testimony painted a vivid picture of how the network had schemed to take down Trump, leveraging its influence to control the narrative. According to this source, the veteran had been promised media coverage and a platform to air grievances, but only under the condition that they participate in a dramatic, scripted confrontation. The veteran's role was more than just a disgruntled guest. It was part of the network's larger strategy to frame Trump in a negative light. The whistleblower's testimony not only corroborated the leaked documents, but also exposed the network's pattern of unethical behavior. The network had a history of staging interviews and manipulating their content to create headlines, often using highly politicized guests to fuel their agenda. The whistleblower's detailed account became a key piece of evidence in the lawsuit, pushing the legal battle into even more contentious territory. As the lawsuit gained traction, It became a focal point for public discourse. Supporters of Trump rallied behind him, decrying the corrupt media and cheering for his legal victory. On the other side, the network and the veteran faced mounting criticism for their actions. The veteran, once seen as a patriotic figure, now found himself under intense scrutiny. His image was shattered as people began to question his integrity and motives. Meanwhile, the network's once untouchable status crumbled as advertisers, public figures, and even former fans began to distance themselves. The leaks, the lawsuits, and the whistleblowers formed an unrelenting wave of exposure that left the network's reputation in tatters. The guest, once on the defensive, had turned the tables, fighting back not only in the courtroom but in the court of public opinion. With every new revelation, the guest's case grew stronger, and the media empire that had tried to destroy him was left to grapple with the consequences of their actions. The tide had shifted, and now justice was a step closer to being served. The weight of the legal battles and the constant barrage of bad press finally took its toll on the network. Facing the undeniable evidence of corruption, defamation, and manipulation, the executives were left with no choice but to cancel the show. The once popular program, which had prided itself on its hard-hitting journalism, now found itself in freefall. Viewers turned against it, disgusted by the blatant manipulation that had been exposed. The network, desperate to salvage any remnants of its credibility, announced the show's abrupt cancellation. But that wasn't all. The court case had just begun to take its full toll. The network was slapped with heavy fines for their role in orchestrating the defamatory interview and violating ethical journalism standards. The fines were a blow to the network, hitting them in the pocketbook where it hurt the most. Their once reliable sponsors, fearing further backlash, began pulling their advertising dollars, and advertisers who had once lined up to appear on the show quickly distanced themselves. In the end, the network's reputation was in tatters, and its brand was all but destroyed. For the veteran, what had started as a moment of public bravado now became a liability. As more details emerged about his involvement in the setup, his reputation was irreparably damaged. Once seen as a respected figure, he now stood as the face of a scheme that had been designed to bring down a political figure. The backlash from his supporters and from the public was swift and unforgiving. Media outlets that had previously championed him began to distance themselves, and his public persona crumbled under the weight of the scandal. Meanwhile, Trump emerged from the chaos stronger than ever. What had initially seemed like a misstep had turned into a masterclass in resilience. Not only had he won the legal battle, but he had also exposed the media's dark underbelly for the world to see. The case made headlines across the country, with Trump being hailed as a symbol of defiance against the biased and corrupt media. His supporters rallied around him, bolstered by the evidence that had been brought to light. Social media exploded in his favor, with viral hashtags and memes spreading like wildfire. Trump's base grew even more solidified, while his opponents struggled to find a way to respond to the truth that had been laid bare. For Trump, this moment marked a key turning point in his public life. The media had tried to tear him down, but in the end, it was the media itself that had been exposed. The episode had given Trump an unprecedented platform to speak directly to the public, and his response was now the centerpiece of his narrative. His critics couldn't ignore it, and his supporters felt vindicated by the legal victory and the truth that had come to light. The entire incident had only solidified Trump's place as a formidable force in politics and media, and he now stood as a symbol of strength against the very institutions that had tried to tear him down. The final chapter of the story wasn't just a victory for Trump, it was a victory for truth. The case had exposed the manipulation, the biases, and the corruption that ran through the heart of the media. It was a testament to the power of standing up for what's right, no matter the cost. As Trump's victory was celebrated by his supporters, the industry was forced to take a hard look at itself. No longer could it hide behind the veneer of impartiality. The curtain had been pulled back, and the public had seen the truth. In the aftermath, the show and the network that had orchestrated the attack were left in ruins, and the veteran who had once stood as a symbol of patriotism was left to grapple with his involvement in a scheme that had now become infamous. Trump, on the other hand, had come out of the ordeal stronger than ever, with his political career and public image only growing in stature. The case had not only given him a victory in court, but had also reinforced his position as a leader who would never back down from a fight, no matter the odds. And as the dust settled, the message was clear. Justice had been served. The people who had tried to manipulate the truth had been exposed, and the hero Trump had come out on top. The victory wasn't just his, it was a victory for anyone who believed in standing up against a system that was rigged to attack those who dared to challenge it. If you care about the truth, share this video.